Good evening. This is the Informational Television Agency. Our headlines today. Will the Soviet Union Parliament last? Gorbachev calls upon people to rise above their difficulties and arguments. Participants in the funeral meeting in Chisinau are against a new bloodletting. Olszewski has given up hope for forming a new Polish government. Zionism is no longer a form of racism, according to the General Assembly of the UN. Interpol considers that the crime wave in the Soviet Union can be stopped. These and other informational items will now give you in detail. Today, the flag was taken down over the Supreme Soviet at Kremlin, and that led to rumors being spread that the Russian Supreme Soviet was taking over, and that the Soviet Union Supreme Soviet was being disbanded. But this was only a matter of technical factors. So what do we have to say now about the Supreme Soviet? The speakers of the organization were called to Khasbulatov to hear about a statement with about the Russian Republican Supreme Soviet statement as to the effect that they were taking over. We had a lot of discussion on things such as housing, and it was a very unpleasant conversation. There's undesirable hustle and bustle here on a state level. Anarbek Alimzhanov gave an evaluation which was supported by virtually all those present. This was a pressure being exerted not only on the parliament but on the republics as well. The deputies from the Central Asian republics had not been recalled yet, and they were prepared to appeal this decision to the International Court. There was also a number of negative views expressed with regard to the Russian authorities and their decision. And this is Mr. Zhirinovsky, a conservative, who was not permitted to speak. Gorbachev spoke to Alimzhanov and Lubenchenko. Above the Kremlin today, there are two flags today of the Soviet Union and Russia as well. Let's wait to the weekend, and if the Central Asian republics become members of the Commonwealth, then the fate of the Soviet Union will be resolved on a simpler basis. Today there was a meeting of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. The discussions which took place with Secretary of State Baker were discussed, and likewise the forthcoming meeting of heads of state in Almaty. The possible documents which might be signed in Almaty were brought to Mr. Gorbachev's attention. The transformation of the Soviet Union, the shift to a new status, should be completed by the end of this year. Many of the official bodies of the Soviet Union will be either liquidated or transferred to Russia. Yeltsin gave an interview to the Italian newspaper Repubblica, in which he said that by the end of December, or not later than the middle of January, Mr. Gorbachev would be able to take a decision as to his possible resignation. The Soviet Union can't be just cancelled by a stroke of the pen. This is the point of view of Mr. Gorbachev, as handed over by Mr. Grachov, who is his press spokesman. This is a transformation of our country from one status into another. During this period, which might last perhaps to the middle of January of next year, it was important that confrontation be avoided in policies and in international relations. Gorbachev was concerned that this entire process take place on a legal, regulated basis, observing conditions of openness and glasnost, so that the fate of our people would be decided properly. We want to avoid instability and threats from within and from without. And we require strict control over nuclear weaponry. As far as Gorbachev's possible participation in Alma-Ata on January 22nd, when the heads of state are to meet, Mr. Grachev says this would be determined by the nature of the meeting which took place. Kazakhstan would be represented in its views, which would be handed over to the participants in the meeting. Of course, written communication has an advantage, but it's best to meet for people to meet alive, together. And since all the presidents are alive, why don't they all get together in Alma-Ata and discuss things at the negotiating table and not in the epistolary genre? Throughout the territory of Moldova, formerly in Moldavia, this is a day of mourning. The funeral music is being played. The Parliament's work has been postponed for one day. This is the funeral ceremony for the policeman who died in the shooting that took place there. Here we have the final results. 7 persons were killed, 14 were wounded, 20 soldiers were arrested, 1 submachine gun and 22 Kalashnikovs were confiscated. Yesterday, on national television, there was a speech by Mircea Snegur, who is the President of the Republic, and he called upon people to live in peace. And they came to the conclusion, and general conclusion, as to how to solve the situation, to move the troops back into their areas of permanent stationing. So it's time for these ambitious politicians to begin thinking about how they happen to spill this blood. And perhaps we should all ourselves give some thought to it. We have just received a declaration of the Russian government which recognized the independence of Armenia and Kazakhstan. The president of Azerbaijan, Ayas Mutalibov, has become commander-in-chief of the armed forces and located on the territory of the Republic, with the exception of strategic nuclear forces. Today in Vladikavkaz, there was a session of the Supreme Soviet of Northern Ossetia, which extended the state of emergency in the capital and in the suburbs of the Republic. This was to be expected. The situation in the Republic is quite tense. The peaceful and non-peaceful assaults on the city keep the population in a constant state of anxiety, which has become quite severe, and even the empty stores don't seem so bad nowadays compared to this threat. People are worried how to protect themselves and their children. The Republican Guard and the self-defense units might not be the best way of going about things, but what else can people do? We need to resolve this situation through negotiations on a peaceful basis, but we have less and less hope for a peaceful outcome. One more piece of news from Northern Caucasia. Dagestan will become a member of Russia as an independent region. This was a statement of the government which took place in Makhachkal. The discussion today began with a discussion of the political situation in the Republic. The relationship of Dagestan to the Commonwealth was discussed. Dagestan will become a member of the Commonwealth as a member of Russia, part of Russia. We have a problem here of, first of all, of personnel decisions and the crime problem. And we need to create a government which would enjoy the people's confidence. We also have to conduct a referendum on as to determine the wishes of the people of Dagestan. This day, 5 years ago, the events in the central square of Alma-Ata were remembered. The young people of Kazakhstan opposed the replacement of Kunayev by Moscow by replacing him with Kolbin. The December events of '86 and human rights during the period of forming a state, that is the agenda of the International Congress on Human Rights, which is currently taking place in the capital of Kazakhstan. The events were distorted. This was a suppression of a peaceful demonstration by young people. It was not intended to be against other peoples. It was peaceful, and the cruel